Robertson. I am a family and consumer sciences extension educator with the University of Idaho. And joining me today, I have Danielle Scott, also with the University of Idaho, helping out. She's going to be monitoring chat and Q&A and some other things. And Serene Greenway, also with Idaho, is joining us. So today we are going to be talking about charcuterie board basics. This is a class that was requested by previous participants of this series. So I was glad to take that on, and I can tell you I have learned a lot about charcuterie boards in preparation for this class, and it's really been a lot of fun. So today, some of the different things we're going to talk about is we're going to do kind of a brief intro and history to charcuterie. What are some different types of charcuterie? Talk about boards and accessories that can be helpful. What are some foods to include? We're talking about the 3-3-3-3 method, some tips and tricks, and always food safety when entertaining and having a charcuterie board. And then I will have a live demonstration and we'll have some time for Q&A. So before we move on, I'm going to have Danielle launch a quick poll so that you can answer that. It's 4 short questions. So our first question is this your first time participating in an extension class, activity, or event? And if you have participated in other states, that definitely counts as well. And then the second one is, are you participating in Get the Dish for the first time? This is our 3rd year doing this series. Our third question is, what is your experience level with charcuterie boards? Several people have already answered, and it looks like we've got some no experience all the way to very experienced. But most people have no or just a little bit. And that's where I was when I started preparing for this class. So hopefully some of the tips and tricks I've learned along the way will be helpful for you. We'll give it about 10 more seconds so that everyone gets a chance to answer. If you are joining via a tablet or a phone, sometimes the polls don't show up very well. So if you can answer them, great. If not, we do understand those technical difficulties you may have. All right, thank you for answering. I'm going to end that poll. And all right. So a little bit of history when it comes to charcuterie. So charcuterie is the pairing of 2 French terms. So char, meaning meat, and coute, meaning cooked. And it really started in about the 15th century. And that term was coined to shops that were specializing in cured meats. And as in France, as in many other countries, each region is a little bit different. So throughout France, each region developed its own charcuterie traditions, influenced a lot mainly by ingredients and cultural preferences. Charcutiers were the people who made the meats, who owned these shops. They were very highly respected, and their products became a very vital part of French cuisine, enjoyed both in everyday meals and at festivals. So while we think of charcuterie in current day, we think of lots of different foods, but really charcuterie in French is really only talking about that meat. So if you are talking about charcuterie, you need to know we're talking about American version, not the French version. So that the modern charcuterie board that many of us think about now is fairly new. So we really saw in like the mid-90s, there was a larger resurgence in the interest in charcuteries, especially with more American grocers and specialty shops offering a wider variety of products beyond just meats. And then I feel like especially these last couple of years, but even the last 10, 15 years, there has been a huge rise in the number of people who are interested, just the exposure we see, the photos, all of that. And social media really played a large part of that. I know when you do make that charcuterie board, especially if it took you a lot of time and effort, it really is, fun to take a photo of it, share it with your friends, show people what you've done. So I think that's one reason we see and hear so much about them anymore. But they're just a great, fun thing to do for parties, gatherings, lots of different events you may have going on. So there are some different types of boards. Today, we're mainly going to focus on the classic charcuterie board. And that's what is made with those varieties of meats, cheeses, crackers, breads, other carbohydrates. Quite often they have nuts, fruits, spreads, sometimes pickled products, just kind of a variety of different things. However, you can adjust your board if you have a specific theme you're trying to meet, or like if you were doing a breakfast charcuterie board, then you could get some of those traditional breakfast foods. Or if it was a brunch, maybe have bagels, pastries, fruits, yogurts, some different cream cheeses, other spreads you might put on those bagels. Maybe you want to have a dessert charcuterie, so you have your dinner, but then afterwards have that charcuterie board out for that sweet treat at the end of the evening. And you can do lots of different things. So maybe cookies, chocolates, still some fruits, candies, kind of whatever you want. I've also seen like hot cocoa charcuterie boards, where beyond just having some different types of cocoa, you might have mixes, marshmallows, whipped cream, candy canes, kind of make it your own. Or there's holiday ones. Like for example, with Halloween coming up, you might do one that's really focusing on orange and black foods. Or if you're doing a Christmas one, maybe it's in the shape of a tree, or has some different desserts or treats that you really only see at Christmas time. Also, you could do a charcuterie board that's kid friendly. So it'll have some of those meats and cheeses and things, but maybe more simplified, you know, um, and don't have some of those flavors that kids might not be as excited about. Like I know today when I show you the board that we're doing as part of this class, it's got some different kinds of cheeses that might not be very appealing to children. But if you just do plain cheddar, mozzarella, some different things like that, and maybe instead of salamis or prosciuttos, maybe they just want ham and turkey or different things on there. And you could have juice boxes, just kind of make it fun. One thing with boards is it allows you to be creative. There really is no wrong way to do one. So if you are going to do one, I just encourage you get the stuff and just go for it. I would definitely have some sort of theme or idea of what you're doing, just because you don't want foods that completely clash or don't go together on your board at the same time. So the first step when preparing or thinking about what you're going to do for your charcuterie board is figuring out what type of board are you going to be placing the food on. So is it going to be kind of that traditional board? Is it going to, so I know a lot of people, wood is a very common option, and that's, what I will be using today. And you can get specialized charcuterie boards, you can make them, or if you just get a regular, cutting board, a bamboo board, something like that. It doesn't have to be, a specialized board that you spend a bunch of money on. As long as it's just that nice flat surface and it's large enough to meet your needs, great. You could also do marble or stone. Some of the nice things about a marble or stone one is it's going to help keep your meats and cheeses cooler than a wood board would. It does look, very, it's maybe a little fancier, higher end. Unfortunately, it is going to be a little bit heavier. And if you're not careful, it could damage, the surfaces that you put it on if you aren't very careful. And it can be a little bit fragile. So definitely be thinking about that if you are wanting to use that marble or stone board. You can use slate like this black one here. It offers kind of that unique, different look than these other types of boards. You can also, if there's space in between the foods, you could use chalk to write on it. However, it can be quite fragile. It can scratch really easily. You want to make sure it is food safe, or then definitely put parchment paper on it. So you do want to be careful about where you're sourcing your boards. Ceramic or glass are also good options. Kind of like the marble, they can sometimes help keep that food a little bit cooler. But again, the weight is going to be more, and then also it is a little bit easier to break. So do be keeping that in mind if you're going to use ceramic or glass. And plastic, it's kind of hit or miss. It is nice that you can get some different plastic boards. Sometimes it's easier to find ones that maybe have themes on them, maybe nice pictures, but they are going to quite often crack more easily. You want to be careful that it is a plastic that's designed to put food on. It's not just decorative plastic. So when you are choosing your board, really do your research and make sure that it is going to meet your needs and that it is what you would like to be using. Accessories is also something to be thinking of when you are getting ready to prepare a charcuterie board. It's really handy to have either ramekins or small bowls for you to put your dips in. Maybe if you've got some softer cheeses, if you want to contain some of your smaller pieces like nuts or things, those can be very helpful. You do want to be keeping food safety in the back of your mind as you're doing this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But having tongs or different serving utensils so that guests aren't having to touch the food with their fingers. So you want to have all those serving things. So those tongs, cheese knives or spreaders, maybe some small spoons or forks. Depending on the sauce or dip that you're using, some honey dippers can be great little accessories to have. Um, but you don't need to go out and spend a bunch of money on all these accessories if you don't have them. Just look around to see what you have. Do you have some little small bowls? Do you have, some tiny knives or little tongs? Maybe some extra forks or spoons, or go to the thrift store. You never know what you're going to find. So there are sets of these accessories that you can buy. Sometimes they can get a little spendy, but definitely there's a lot of stuff in your home that you can use, so you won't need to go purchase a bunch of things to go with your board. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about some of the main foods that you would want to include in that traditional charcuterie board. So cheese is obviously one of the focal points. So cheese and meats both are kind of our big centerpieces, kind of the main parts of our boards. And looking at lots of different stuff, some people say do cheese first, some people say do meat first. It kind of depends on what you want to do. I don't think it makes a huge difference, just as long as you're making sure your board is cohesive. But I would definitely do the meats and cheeses before I did most of the other things. Um, so for your cheese, you want to figure somewhere, 2 to 3 ounces per person. Um, if this is kind of the main focus of what people are going to be eating. If you've got lots of other dishes and other things going on, definitely you could do a little less, but this is just kind of that general rule of thumb. It's great if you can choose a mixture of soft and hard cheeses. You want to have different textures, different flavors. There's lots of different cheeses out there. There's so many. So I've really only listed a few on this slide, but some great examples include things like brie, cream cheese, blue cheese, cheddar, manchego, camembert, Gouda. But just go to the cheese aisle at your store and see what you can find. You never know. There's all sorts of fun cheeses out there. Meats. We're going to have about the same amount of meats as cheeses. So we're recommending that 2 to 3 ounces per person. And you want to choose a variety of cold cuts or deli meats. So definitely meats that are designed to serve cold, because your board needs to stay cold for food safety reasons. So there's a lot of different meats out there. Some of the common ones that we see include prosciutto, ham, salami, chorizo, smoked turkey, summer sausage. Just kind of choose, what types of meats you and whoever you're inviting to this gathering, what types of meats they enjoy. Also try to be thinking what type of meats might go well with some of those cheeses and other things on your plate, or sorry, your board. Some other foods, savory accompaniments. Most of the recommendations are that you have at least one from each category. Although if you have two from a category and skip one other category, that's fine, but I would really want to have as many different categories as possible and try not to just have a ton from just one category. So nuts is always a great thing to have. It's easy to use that as fillers in some of your empty spots on your board. You can do just regular salted nuts, nut mixes, or candied nuts, pistachios, cashews. Although you do want to be keeping food allergies in mind. So if you are preparing a board for like a new group and you're not sure, I would check with them and make sure, do they have nut allergies? If there are dairy allergies, then you might need to really kind of pivot, maybe have a smaller dairy-free board and then a larger board with cheese. There are some dairy-free cheese options out there, but if you aren't used to those, some people might not be a big fan. So definitely be thinking about those different dietary needs and keeping that in mind. Uh, Some people really like to include pickled items. So maybe they're pickled, marinated, briny, whether that be olives, different pickles, cocktail onions. There's lots of different little pickled foods. However, if you are doing some type of pickled food like that, because it is going to typically have those extra juices, I would recommend you put it in a little dish, not stick it straight onto your board, or that pickly brine can leach into your other food, make your crackers soggy, cause some off flavors. So really be mindful of that when you are purchasing different things, thinking, do I have a container that I can put that in and either put it on my board or right next to the board. Dips and spreads. It's fun to have lots of different, spreads for your crackers, your meat, however you want to shake things up. Hummus, I think, is always a hit. It's something that goes with a lot of different foods. And you can get plain hummus, or there's different, garlic hummuses, red pepper hummuses, different spices. So, go creative, or that would be one other thing where you could keep it kind of mild and then maybe go more adventurous with different dips and spreads to make sure there's something for everyone. You can also do some of the traditional things like ranch, balsamic dips, mustards. So really kind of think about what that group likes, what goes with the rest of your foods. And then vegetables are a nice thing to kind of break it up. Tomatoes are nice, they give it kind of that extra acidity. Or, carrots, broccoli, snap peas, just all little finger vegetables that are nice and easy to eat when they're raw. These are also mostly great things that are really fun to put in a bunch of those different dips, and it adds some nice flavor. You also want to make sure you have some sweet items on your board. So that could include things such as fresh fruit. I would recommend try to choose something that's in season if you can. I know sometimes we don't really have very many things in season. So definitely just be looking at your grocery store. Although if I was doing a charcuterie board in summer, this would be a great opportunity to go visit your farmer's market and go see what type of produce that you could include in your board. Dried fruit is also fun to include. It gives some of those different textures while still providing that sweetness. I would be careful maybe to not, if you are getting fruits, maybe try to get ones that don't have a bunch of added sugar, just because that can make it too sweet. Also, fruits on their own are very sweet when they're dried. So adding that extra sugar really isn't necessary. And a lot of us don't need added sugar in our diet. It's also nice if you can include a sweet spread. So maybe something like a fig butter, some marmalades, jams, or honey. And then if you have a chocolate, some people like to include it, some people don't. It's kind of hit and miss. But I would encourage either like some chocolate covered nuts, little chunks of a high quality dark chocolate. And again, these are just kind of guidelines. You don't have to, make sure that go down your list and make sure you absolutely have one from every category. Just make sure that you're varying your foods, varying those colors and textures. But again, make sure you're choosing foods that people like. Like I know in the last slide I mentioned, include something pickled. But if no one in your group likes something pickled, then don't put it on the tray just because it says you should include one. So really be thinking about what foods are people going to enjoy. You also want to have some crackers, crisps, something like that. It's great because they are kind of that venue for getting your dips. Or sometimes people like to make little mini sandwiches with their crackers and meats or cheese, or eat them all together. So have a variety. It's good to have one or two that are fairly mild flavored. But then sometimes it's fun to get things that have some other flavors too. You just want to, again, try to make sure it's not clashing too much with other flavors on your board. Some good examples might include things like pita crackers, herbed crackers, pretzel crisps, buttery crackers like Ritz, or just traditional crackers, Triscuits, wheat thins, lots of different ones, or some baguettes, flatbreads. You can do lots of different things with those crackers or crisps. So I know I kind of, gave a list of all those different food groups to potentially include on your board. And I said, well, try to get at least one or try to get this much. I did find a lot of people subscribe to the 3-3-3-3 method. And that is great, especially for beginners. If you're not quite sure, how to get started or a little hesitant, it's really easy to remember. And it's just, you do 3 of all these things. So you got your 3 meats. So choose 3 different meats, make sure you've got a variety. Choose 3 cheeses. So I want to make sure they're not just all soft cheeses or hard cheeses or crumbly cheeses. Try to do at least 2 or 3 different textures or types of cheeses. Do 3 different starches. So make sure that they, again, pair well with your meats or cheeses. And that can be, those crackers, baguettes, pretzels, whatever you want. And then choose 3 accompaniments. So that could be your nuts, your fruits, your pickles, your, dips, whatever. So this is just one easy way to kind of just think I need 3 of everything. So if you're worried and you're an overthinker, just keep it simple. Use the 3-3-3-3 method, and you'll have great success. So here are a couple examples of some charcuterie boards that people I know, when they heard I was doing this class, I have a few friends that sent me some pictures. So on the left here, we've got a charcuterie table, if you will. So they took the table, they covered it in butcher paper, they put lots of different foods down. Luckily, you can see all the items that are need to be refrigerated for food safety. They're in separate dishes. So those were something that they were able to put out at the very end as they were preparing this board. And they also, by using butcher paper like this, they're able to write next to everything so that everyone who's fixing their plate can see what types of foods those are. This one in the middle is from a gathering, and you can see it looks a little fancier. Obviously, I believe someone who does this either for a living or they're a caterer put this together. It looks like most of what they have out there are things that, fruits, crackers. There's a little bit of cheeses and meats, but most of it are things we're not too worried about going bad in a short period of time. And then the far one on the right is a fun board that someone did for a gathering with a few other friends. I think they did a paint and sip and had someone come over and teach them how to do some different painting. And one of the participants put this together for her and her friends to have something to snack on throughout the evening. So there are some definite tips that I would recommend you remember when you are putting together your charcuterie board. So if you have wet items, make sure that you have some small bowls or containers that is going to hold any of those wet items. It helps, keep ingredients from other ingredients from getting soggy. It is nice that it keeps all of that, food together for easy access. Try to arrange with variety. So if you can, have some different colors, have some different textures, definitely. You can add, make it a little more decorative. You could fan out slices of cheese or meats. You can fold them. You can create, salami roses, which that is something we're going to be doing today. Fill in the gaps. If you have some large spaces on your board, definitely use some of those smaller items like nuts, berries, dried fruits to fill in those empty spaces. It makes the board look more appealing. And then also don't be afraid to add more. Like I know I mentioned that 3-3-3-3 method, and while that is a great place to start, you can always add some extra dips, add some garnishes. Maybe there's some seasonal items to enhance your board. I know while preparing for this class, I saw some different boards that had mini pumpkins on there just for decoration. And you can also use fresh herbs, edible flowers, lots of different things to dress up your board, make it more attractive and appealing. But at the same time, don't overcomplicate it. You can keep it simple, and that's just fine. Really make sure that you're designing your board with your guests in mind. Include things that they like and also they recognize. If you go out and buy lots of different fancy cheeses, fancy meats, and nobody in the group is familiar with those, they might be hesitant to try it. So I'm not saying don't try some new foods, but definitely have some of the staples that people are familiar with, and then add a couple other things that maybe would be new to them. If you're able to add some color, that's always great. If you can add some of those bright pops of color that are different, fruits and vegetables are going to bring, that makes your board again, it gives it that attractiveness. And then think about where you are going to shop when you are going out to purchase the items for your charcuterie board. But first, check your pantry, check your refrigerator. You may already have several ingredients in there, and maybe you don't have to make a large shopping list. But be aware of some different sales at your local grocery store. If you have any discount grocery stores in your area, that's a great place to go. When I was, watching some different videos and looking at different things to get ideas for this class, I came across a video that someone did a charcuterie board completely from the Dollar Tree. They were able to get several items and keep it a very budget-friendly charcuterie board, and it actually turned out pretty good looking. So be aware of, what you have going around. Also, it'd be a great opportunity to visit some of your farmers markets. Maybe you have farm stands in the areas. Go support local businesses and see what kind of fun different foods they might supply that you could add to your charcuterie board. Definitely, there are a few things I would recommend you not do. Overcrowding is one. While we do want to have a nice full board, if you put too much on the board, it can be difficult for people to get the food item that they're wanting without making a mess. This board on here, it's kind of, I feel like it's maybe a little borderline. It might be a little overcrowded to some people. I could see some foods being a little harder to grab. So I personally would probably do a little less on this board. But again, part of it is just your perception, your own personal preference. But again, think about what is going to work best for those people that you are serving and who are going to be partaking in eating this board. Be cautious of using foods with overpowering aromas or flavors. You don't want someone to walk up to a board and all they smell is just one ingredient. You want it to be, you do want foods with, definite distinctive flavors, but you don't want things that are so overpowering it's going to override everything else on that board. I also encourage to stay away from messy or hard to eat foods. Try to use foods that someone can eat with a toothpick, a small fork, with their hands, but you don't want, typically charcuterie boards are something that you just kind of grab and go. You're able to eat them in a variety of social settings. You don't want something where people are worried they're going to spill all over their shirt, worried they don't have utensils to eat it. So keep it to really simple finger type foods, with exception of dips and things. But again, as long as you have a spoon or serving utensil for that, for them to put it on their plate, then that should be all the utensils they're going to need for that. When you are choosing different foods or ingredients, don't choose ones that aren't going to hold up. If it's something that's going to fall apart, something that's really delicate and just isn't going to look very good by the time you get it on the board, I would recommend not putting it on your board. It could be something, if it's a little, juicier or not very firm, you could potentially put it in a bowl or something, but it's definitely something that you wouldn't want to just put on the board itself. something that's going to kind of, spread out and get on other foods or cause any issues. And then a poor flavor or texture balance. You want to make sure that you do have some different flavors and textures. You don't want everything on the board to be soft. You want to have some of that crunch. You want to have, some different flavors as well. You don't want all sweet. You don't want all savory. You don't want all salty. So really trying to do a nice balance of different flavors, different textures is going to give everyone the best eating experience possible. As always, food safety is something that we all need to be keeping in mind, especially because a charcuterie board is something that after you've prepared it, there's not going to be any cooking, any heat that it's exposed to that could potentially kill any bacteria that might be there. So you want to make sure that you are starting with very clean hands, your surfaces, so your counters are clean. Make sure you've washed your boards, platters, trays, whatever it is you're putting on there. If you are using like a table, a counter, again, making sure you wash it well and then put down that butcher paper. I would tape that paper in place so there's no movement. When you are actually placing your food items on the board, wash your hands a lot, but I would really recommend using gloves or utensils to put those items on the board, just to be as safe as you can and to introduce as minimal bacteria or other microorganisms as possible to those food items. Definitely, as you are getting your produce, fresh herbs, any of those items ready, you want to wash them thoroughly under running water. And then when you are cutting them, make sure you're using a clean knife, a clean cutting board. And then when you're done, wash and sanitize those really well. If possible, you want to use a cutting board that was not used for any raw products. If you can have a cutting board just for those, fresh raw produce and keep that separate from your meat cutting boards, that would be ideal. If you are putting meats and cheeses on your board, if you are doing a large table, I would recommend you leave those in the refrigerator, put out your nuts, your crackers, your fruits, dried fruits, all of that, get that out first. Any cut produce, you want to do that near the end as well. And then pull out meats and cheeses and dips right before you are going to serve. You don't want those sitting out on the table for hours. So if you are doing something at a room temperature is where you're going to have this board, you want to make sure that that food isn't sitting there for more than 2 hours. So if you have a charcuterie board sitting out on your counter, you've got a large table, put those meat and cheeses out last, and I would only put smaller amounts that you think is going to get eaten right away. It's not a bad idea to have extra chopped and prepared in the refrigerator so you can restock things. Same with dips. You can replace dips, every hour or so. So either have new containers to put your dip in or wash out that container and then add your new dip. If you are outside in a hot environment above 90 degrees, you really don't want that food to be at room temperature for more than 1 hour. So really be thinking about how you're going to be having safety in mind. Or if you are doing a large table, can you have ice under those different meats and cheeses, making sure that you have protection, something you can put over the table if people aren't eating right, constantly. Can you protect it from flies or other bugs? So just really, think about all the different components for that. If it's been, more than 2 hours, let's say it's been, 2.5, 3 hours, then I would take all that perishable food, your meats, your cheeses, your dips, and throw that away. I wouldn't save it as leftovers. It's probably going to be not potentially safe to eat. So be keeping in mind too, do you want to throw away a lot of stuff? So maybe be careful on how much food you're putting out. If you're doing a smaller tray, like what I'll be doing today, I'm going to do it and have meats and cheeses first and then add all the other things. And if I wasn't going to be serving it right away, I would cover it in plastic wrap and put the whole tray in the refrigerator to stay nice and cool until it's time to pull it out and serve for that event that I'm fixing a tray for. All right, so now we are going to switch over. I'm going to change up my cameras and we're going to do a demonstration. All right, so today I angled my camera a little differently so that you can really see the board and what I am doing. So I know I'm going to be using this wooden board for our demonstration today, but I wanted to let you know you can definitely use different trays. Like if I was going to be making a board at home and then transporting it to a party or a different event, I would likely use something like this tray that has a little bit of a lip. That way it'll keep my foods contained and there's less chance of spillage. So this tray is actually made of melamine. It is food safe. However, when you go to the store, you'll notice there are a lot of trays out there that are for decorative purposes only. They aren't designed for food. So if you were going to use one of those, then I would put down parchment paper or plastic wrap or something on here first, and then add my food to keep it safe. So definitely you can find lots of fun trays. This one is obviously a little bit fall themed. I know when I was at the store purchasing all the food items for today, I saw a really fun leaf-shaped tray that you could do for a fall party. But today we're just doing that kind of traditional board with wood. So one of the first things I recommend with your board is you want to put down any dishes, bowls, things like that that you are going to be using. So I have just little glass canning jars that I have here in my kitchen. And if for the sake of time, I've already pre-filled these. In most cases, I'd probably wait and do my dips near the end. So our two dips that I have this one is a hummus, and this one is actually a whipped cracked pepper spread. So if you didn't want it to, if you didn't care if they were matching, if you didn't, necessarily think that you needed to have some of that coherence, you could even take something like this and include that on your board. But I know I would like it to be a little more presentable, a little more cohesive, so that's why I put it in the little glass jar. Okay, and then now that I've got that on, I am going to be putting on gloves because everything else that we're going to be doing is ready to eat foods, and I don't want to risk getting germs on anything. So I did sanitize this counter off camera. I've cleaned the board, I washed my hands, all of that. So our first thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to put our meats on. And we have two types of meats. Our first meat is actually a sweet sopressata. And I pre-made one of my meat roses, so you wouldn't have to, we will do one in a minute, but that way I'd already have one done. And I am just going to scooch it on, right there. Okay, so then our next meat I'm going to do is going to be a chorizo. And I'm going to use this meat and show you how to make a meat rose. Before getting ready for this class, I'd never made a meat rose. And it's actually so much easier than I thought it might be. So what I recommend is just take a small glass. It's suggested maybe a champagne flute or something. I don't have any of those here in the office, but I do have lots of canning jars. So I just grabbed a small half pint, and you take your meat and you just stick it on the edge and fold it in half. And then you just kind of do that. You just start overlapping them a little bit and going around the edge of your cup. And you just keep doing that. You do want to pinch them fairly firm. If you don't give enough pressure, it seems like they want to kind of pop off a little bit more. And if you're able to pull your meat out and maybe let it sit there for like 5 minutes or so before you start putting it on the cup, they'll be a little bit easier to bend, not as cold as when they come straight out of the refrigerator. But definitely you don't want to have it sitting out, for an hour before you make your meat flour, or I guess a rose. So you can do this with, lots of different deli meats, but typically it's going to work best with these thin, pre-sliced circular cuts of meat. If you are purchasing a larger piece of meat and wanting to cut it yourself, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to cut the pieces thin enough unless you have a meat slicer at home. But these, packages of meat like this are really pretty affordable. Okay, I'm almost done. I'm going to use this whole package. If I had more meat, they would recommend that you keep going until the whole middle of your rose is filled in. We're not going to have quite enough for that, but I think we'll still have a very decent sized rose. If I was using a champagne flute, then I probably would have the middle filled in because it is a little bit smaller. Okay, so once you've got all your petals on there, then you want to put your cup down. I think I'm going to do it right here. And then you kind of gently twist and then it comes right off. So it took what, a minute or two to make a rose, and it really was super simple. And then it's easy to eat it. You just grab, one of them in the middle and just pull them as you go and put them on your plate. So our next item we're going to be adding is our cheeses. And one thing too, as you're making your board, if you put something on there, you don't quite like how it looks, that's fine. You can always switch things up, move it around. It's not like you put something on there and it has to stay exactly there. Feel free to move things around and do what looks good to you. So for our cheeses, I got a couple different types, and I've already pre-sliced them. That way I can still, leave my gloves on. And so our first one is a Winesdale and blueberries cheese. So a little bit sweeter cheese. And I'm just gonna kind of stick it in a little pile right here. And it is a little bit more crumbly than some cheeses, so I thought chunks would work better than trying to do slices. There. All right, so I think that's, like I said, I got one more piece there. I'll stick it on there. All right, so our next cheese is going to be an aged cheddar. Because while I think, this is a fun cheese, blueberries in their cheese might not be everybody's cup of tea, but most everyone enjoys a cheddar. And this is a 2-year aged cheddar, so it's going to have a little bit more of a distinct flavor. And again, I just did little cubes for this one. And I'm gonna, I think, do another little pile. And my pieces aren't exact. I just kind of, cut them quickly as I was prepping. I've got a little more, but I'm going to wait. I think my board is going to fill up very quickly, so I'm going to wait on see if I'm going to add more of that cheddar. And then lastly, for another type of cheese, I did a garlic pesto jack. So something to give it a little more fun. And I'm just going to include a little bit in the corner, and I'm just going to spread this out in a little bit of a fan. And this is a little bit more of a, I guess, a pungent or has more aroma than other types of cheese. So I'm not going to include a ton because it might not quite be everybody's cup of tea. All right, so there I'll do Maybe I'll do just two more to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. There, so there is our pesto garlic jack cheese. So now I've got my meats, I've got my cheeses, I've got my dips. Those are kind of the stars. Now it's time to start adding in some of those other things. I think next I'm going to start with some of my carbohydrates, some of those crackers. So I have some red rice and quinoa little cakes that you could easily cut up, use lots of dips, put your crackers on them, put your meat on them. So one thing with this tray that I didn't mention is I am doing a gluten-free tray because gluten and I don't get along, and I want to be able to enjoy this tray with my coworkers and colleagues after this class is done. So I found these little rice cakes at the store. Maybe I'll stick them right here. And something like this, you can kind of stack them, kind of back and forth, however you would like. Some other crackers that I have is I got a multi-grain gluten-free cracker. And I just poured some onto this plate to make it easier to grab them. So I'm going to just kind of stick them on here. One thing when you're doing a board like this, you want to stay away from those, broken bits of crackers. You want it to look nice, be aesthetically pleasing. And if you're using, oh, whoops, that one's broken. If you're using broken crackers, that kind of can detract from it a little bit. And then also the nice thing is that means you get a snack on the broken pieces while you are preparing your tray. There, I think that is looking pretty good. So there are those crackers there. And then I also got, for fun, to do something a little different, I grabbed some cheesy, they're crunches, they're cheddar cheese popcorn crunch snacks. So I thought that would give it some fun color, some different shapes and textures, because it's kind of these nice little sticks. And these might be fun, to use in your dips. Or just eat them plain. I'm going to try to fill in this little bit right here so we don't have too big of a gap between those. Oh, that one's good, but it's a little curly, so I'm trying to stick with the straight ones. There, okay. So that I think is enough of those cheesy crunches. And then next I am going to put on some grapes. So I do have I washed all my grapes and then I dried them with a paper towel. That way they wouldn't, soak into other stuff and make it soggy. So one trick that I would recommend is you lay your grapes out like that, but then you don't want people while they're serving to have to grab individual grapes, anything like that. So then once it's on your tray, just go in with your kitchen shears and cut off little chunks so that there's just, 2 to 4 grapes per each piece of stem. Sorry, my grapes kind of fell apart a little bit. I'm gonna try to stick them back on there. It didn't maintain quite as much of its shape, but at least it stayed on the board fairly well. So now we're getting closer to the end. I have a few things left. I have some dried mangoes that I am going to put on there. I'm going to put some, I think, here in the corner. These mangoes really stuck together in the bag. So when I poured them onto this plate, after I put on gloves and I pulled the mangoes apart so they weren't stuck together. Because nobody wants to be, trying to get something from the tray and, be completely grabbing all the mangoes when they just want to get one or two. So be thinking about that. If you have some foods that stick together, be trying to separate those beforehand so that your guests don't have to deal with that. So I'm going to scooch this over a little bit because my cheese and my mangoes, for me, are a little bit too much the same color. So I want to put something else in right here. And again, that's just something that I'm wanting to do with my board. I know I don't have a ton of different colors on my board, but still I think it's fairly aesthetically pleasing. So next I'm going to move on to the final pieces. I have nuts that I'm going to sprinkle into those different places throughout the board. So I have two different types of nuts. I just have plain salted almonds. For those people that, just want to have something simple, maybe they don't want a ton of, extra flavors. But I mean, who doesn't like salted almonds? They're a nice, fun little snack. And then this other one definitely has some more zing to it. It's a savory almond pecan mix with sesame seeds. It has truffle and Parmesan. So I'm going to put some of those right here in this little bowl. I'm going to put some here. And if you wanted to, you could definitely put these little bowls just on your tray to keep your nuts together if you wanted. But today I'm just liking to put them straight onto my board. All right, so I think we've pretty much used all the different ingredients. I don't think I mentioned where I went shopping. If I did, I apologize. I went to Grocery Outlet, so a local discount grocery store we have here in our town, and they have a wide variety of foods. I was able to get some different things without spending a ton of money. All the groceries I bought yesterday were probably about $70, but I have enough in the other bags and things you can't see. Except for having to get a few more meats and cheeses, I got enough ingredients to do at least 2 more boards. So really, this is a fairly affordable board. It's not too far out of the budget that some people may have. So beyond just having that, then you want to make sure that you have utensils. So I wish I had some cute little spoons. These are just what I have. So even just regular little spoons, you can use that. If you had tiny ones, that might be a little more fun. But again, use what you have. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money just because you want your board to look different. And then having little tongs so people can grab different food items without having to touch everything. A board like this too, it's nice if you can have it in a central location so people can get to it from all sides. So this is our basic simple charcuterie board. I'm going to switch back over to my other camera as we finish up, and then we'll also go over questions.
So Amy, we have one question that's in the chat. How do we make the board dips pretty? Is there a specific utensil we use to whip it in the dish?
I think it would depend a little bit on the type of dip. I know for me, I just to put the dips in there, I just used a clean spoon, put them in there, And then to make them pretty, I used a paper towel and cleaned the top because those dishes are small enough. I did get some dip on there. And then I took my spoon and I tried to kind of make a little bit of a swirly top. Um, so you can, kind of manipulate it like that. Um, as far as other things, it's just really making sure you're having the proper utensil to get it into your bowl or cup successfully. And then yeah, you can, dress up the top a little, make a swirl. You could take a spoon or something and kind of tap the top to create kind of little bumps on the top. So really, kind of just use what you have. If it was something I wanted to be a little fluffier, then I would actually whip it in a larger bowl and then spoon some into my ramekin or smaller dish.